Alright, we are recording. So, this is going to be a long one because it's going to be going through all the AV1 stuff. Which is a bit. I've tried to organize it, but I also almost forgot I need to start with one thing that's a little weird, I'll grant. I could do things a different way that might be cleaner, but that's not how I want to do them. So, when working with FFmpeg on Windows, in my opinion, best thing you should do, best use case, not use case really, but whatever the directory is that has the FFmpeg binaries in, you should add that into your environment variables. That way, whenever you're writing these scripts, whatever, you can just say, hey, just FFmpeg, that's it. Windows is going to go through that list of the path environment variable and be like, okay, is it in there? Hey, it's in here. Okay, I'll start using that. Okay? That I think is best because it just makes things easier. However, the specific fork I am using here for AV1, SVT-AV1-HDR, you can get in different ways. You can compile it yourself. I'm not doing that. Perhaps I should. But one of the ways you can get it is where somebody has set up on GitHub that it, I think once a day, pulls the code and compiles it in the full FFmpeg. Okay? So you have access to all the other FFmpeg commands and filters, all that. And it just replaces FFmpeg's built-in SVT-AV1 encoder with SVT-AV1-HDR. In order to make sure that is the version used, I have this stuff up here. So what this does, and this is temporary, by the way, it's only for the length of the time this script is running. This is taking that path variable, and it is just setting, adding this location to it, which I just keep the SVT AV1-HDR stuff in the FFmpeg folder. It's in its own folder. That's what this is. But yeah, it's just put it in, look to the binary folder, and it's good. And then the rest of the path stuff is after. So the main FFmpeg version that I would use for everything else, when I'm not in the script, that's still given, but that's later on in the path. That's after this, so it uses this first. It uses the version I want first. Alright. Continuing to look, I still got the checks for the height of the video and some roughly okay bitrate limits here. By and large, I'd say don't use... I've talked about this in a previous video. Don't try to use a bitrate limit, a maximum bitrate for AV1, at least not a very aggressive one, because if it wants more bits than that limit, it falls over itself. It looks horrible. Just straight variable bitrate is best, controlled by CRF and all the different parameters we're going to be getting to. And there are quite a few. And some of them are actually covering multiple things. We are looking at the just plus opus, not the dash multi script, so things are a little cleaner here. But it is doing the whole, hey, just call up this custom function. And just like the X265 one, CRF, and preset. Sorry. I do also have the ability to scale it, right there. I would just, so that would be scaling it down to 720, make it 480, whatever. That's all that. Same exact thing as what's in the 265 video. Where it's just, here's the whole thing. There's a lot of parameters. Can also set for maximum bitrate here. We'll get to that later, but here's the VBR, a scale version where it's just adding into the filter chain, scale it by that. Same exact thing as X265, but maybe you didn't look at that video. We're going to skip the maximum bitrate thing for a bit. Come back to here. So yeah, main two things you'd probably be changing, CRF and preset. Preset actually may leave the same all the time, but it depends. What I've gotten to do at this point, unless I really need to see if it's working or not, I will do the testing at preset 4, which is reasonably fast. For 1080 video, it goes at about 1/2 speed. That's not bad. For the actual film or television, though, I've gotten into the habit of using preset 2, which is a bit better. It also gets a little funny. So one reason why that I've seen is that preset 2 has a better motion detection algorithm, I think it is. Might be misremembering, but I've seen it recommended for that reason. It's like, okay, I'll try that. It takes longer. It can produce a smaller video. Sometimes I've actually seen it increase the bitrate though, because it's picking up noise and it's just doing a better job of picking that up, picking up the film grain that's naturally there, and then trying to include that. So sometimes it is worth testing it at preset 2 before you just blindly decide, okay, set this to 2 for the main thing. Sometimes it's worth it, not always, so. Alright, do need to talk about this. The tune. So this is, like in 265, you can change the tune, so it changes different approaches, different algorithms, things like that. And the HDR fork has 5 total tunes. I'm pretty sure the main line has 4. First one, 0, is for visual quality, VQ, and that's by and large what you want to use, okay? Then we got 1, which is peak signal to noise, so it's trying to optimize for that result. So the greater that value, peak signal to noise, PSNR, greater that is, that means that the signal you actually want, the actual detail, is really, really clear, and the noise is really, really low. There's very low noise. SSIM is 2. I don't remember what that stands for. It is, you can actually there are things that will actually let you calculate the peak signal to noise and SSIM between a reference image or video and the output. So the encoded output, you can do that. And metrics like that, they are useful. Sorry. There's another called VMAF that is also kind of useful, but I'm not convinced by it. I always recommend, that stuff can be informative. But by and large, I've actually stopped using any of those metrics. How does it look? In part because I've gotten pretty good at what these parameters are, so okay, let me see how it looks like. All right, change this. All right, that looks good. Fundamentally, it always comes down to what you like to see, what you perceive as better image quality, not the metrics. Which I think was actually one issue with AV1 in its original development, that the developers were heavily focused on optimizing for VMAF, which is fine if your vision is like VMAF, which it isn't. So there's some issues there, which is one reason why the different forks, like originally SVT-AV1-Psi and then Psi-X, because that got forked, and now HDR, it's part of the reason why those exist, is to try to correct certain things there. Just like putting in new settings, changing certain emphases in there, certain biases. And also, I should mention this. I know I need to keep going with the tunes. It also, both the Psi fork and the HDR fork have better defaults. It's like, in some cases it's hey, we put in a new setting, but in other cases it's, hey, no, this setting already exists. We've changed the default value because we think that this will, in general, improve the quality of the video. That is technically something the end user doesn't see, which is why for something like this, try to read through at least the basic README kind of stuff, if not the full documentation, just to see that, hey, this isn't just we've changed things internally in different algorithms. No, it can also be you can get the similar results with the original mainline thing. You just change these defaults. All right, so going back to tune. 3 is image quality, which I believe is meant for the actual, you're saving an image, not a video. 4 is MS SSIM. I don't know what that is. And 5 is film grain. This is something that is unique to SVT-AV1-HDR, and you can actually, instead of using the number, you can actually put in film grain, I believe, and it will use that. But as you may see here, my note here, Tune 5 is a film grain tune, but use toggles instead. Why do I say that? Okay. So the idea with the film grain tune is you can just turn this on, and now you will, the different fine detail stuff, the film grain and such, in the original video will be preserved. It's achieving that, not like the difference between the 0 and 1 here. Okay, it's not really doing internal things. It's actually just changing the settings that I already have up here. So when I realized that, and they are listed in the documentation here. Okay. Where is it? Okay. So in the main README for SVT-AV1-HDR, Tune 5 is, what it does is actually explained here, is equivalent to setting these parameters. Tune 0, which is why I just keep to it, enable TF0, which is to disable some temporal filtering, enable restoration 0, which relates to that, enable CDEF0, complex HVS1, TX bias 1, AC bias 4.0. Okay, there's a lot there, and some of it I can't completely explain. Like enable CDEF. That has to do... CDEF, restoration, TF, all I'm pretty sure kind of relate to each other as far as trying to figure out what the original image was to best then recreate it. So things like edge detection and such. That is definitely stuff that's beyond my understanding. Say, okay, you're doing this, I'll trust that. Complex HVS, that I actually do know about. TX bias and AC bias I also know. So complex HVS, even before I started using this fork, I was using that. So, and that's actually right up here. I have a parameter already set, and it's always turned on. Although I did see somewhere, have the comment right there, where it was suggested that turning it on can be worse for grain. I tested with that and was not convinced. It looked fine. Well, it didn't look sufficiently different on versus off there, and because of what CHVS is, I decided, yeah, I'm going to keep that on. So this is something back from the psychovisual, the SVT-AV1 Psi or Psi-X days, where somebody had realized, well, the developer had realized, why is the video consistently looking better in the mainline one when I'm at these lower presets than higher? And I think it was even from one version of the mainline encoder to the next. And he's like, the heck? This doesn't make sense. I'm going to start digging in. He dug in and he found that at lower presets, so the slower presets, I mean like really slow. I think at the point he found it may have been at 2, but I think 1, 0, and -1. So like these are the you're walking away for the weekend kind of thing to let this process. And he found that it was because of this. Let me try and remember if I actually have this written out somewhere. Yeah, okay. Activation of highest complexity human vision system model. That's what HVS is, okay? So the idea is that it tries to appreciate how human vision works. And what it had been at one point doing was at the higher presets, it was like, no, we're just going to do it this way. But the guy who was doing the Psi or Psi-X fork realized that, oh, this was being turned on. This more complex, more advanced version of those algorithms were turned on at the really slow presets. And he said, okay, I'm going to pull that and just make it an option. So you can force it on at any preset. And because that's like, yeah, I'll keep that enabled. And when I experimented with the processing, it didn't really impact processing speed. So leaving it on all the time is fine with me. Now, what were the others? Okay, it's just TX bias and AC bias. Okay. So those used to be called Psi-RD, and it literally had been Psi-RD as the parameter name, and then Spy-RD, SPY-RD. These are two different psychovisual rate distortion algorithms. Psi-RD, similar concept, different algorithm to what was in 265. And that's also true with Spy-RD, which is, hang on, I mean to juggle some tabs a little bit. Not that, I think it's over here. Yeah. I don't have a deep understanding for how Spy-RD, and I'm keeping the old name since I've been naming it to TX. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me step back a little bit because I'm still explaining about the film grain tune. It forces these on. Okay, so the CHVS, I'm fine with that. But Psi-RD and Spy-RD, no. I don't want those being forced on because it forces them on. And at Psi-RD at 4, Spy-RD at 1. And I don't necessarily want that. I want to be able to tune in the Psi, these rate distortion controls. I want to be able to tune that in. It was overriding them, which is why I have that line, don't use Tune 5, use the toggles. Because I put in that enable TF, the enable restoration, enable CDF, 0, I put those all in to this. And this HQ one, so that's TQ because they're all based on temporal stuff. HQ, that's actually an older thing. That goes back to Psi days as well. HBD-MDS, that is basically forcing it to be 10-bit in its calculations. I'm trying to remember what enabled DLF is, but I don't, because that's been a while. And that, again, that's something from, I saw that recommended with the Psi days before moving to HDR, the HDR fork, and it's like, you know what, I'll just accept that. It is, I'm pretty sure it's something about how it does some of the temporal filtering stuff. It's basically saying, hey, just do it in this way, it should be higher quality. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, these are basically always on. So is that. This is noise adaptive filtering, which I think I want to read off, if I can find it. Yeah, here it is. Okay. Controls noise detection, which disables CDEF/restoration when noise level is high enough. So that's, okay, so that explains these, right? So that, the film grain tune will turn that off, and I've been using TQ, my TQ thing here for a while, and it is, so disabling those, because it's like, hey, the noise might be really high. Okay, so that's actually kind of fun. With NAF at 1, that actually is forcing both on, so I'm actually still turning back on. I should probably experiment with turning it off then. 2 is the default tune behavior, so you just follow whatever it is. But remember, I'm using tune 0, not tune 5. 3 is noise adaptive CDEF only, and then 4 is noise adaptive restoration only. So I guess with 1, that's actually countering this. Okay. I've been happy with the results, but I'll see about trying turning that off, see what happens. But not now, not just now. All right. So now I want to get to these main 3. I already talked about the the psychovisual stuff, so I want to, a little bit, I've introduced those a little bit. I want to get into details on that. Then I'll get to the noise normalization, which is a far more useful, it's a very useful parameter I have found, especially, it's over there, working with FreeRen, and this probably applies to a lot of anime, at least modern anime. I just want to bring back up here there. Okay. So, yeah, as it says here, this psychovisual, the first one, psychovisual rate distortion. So, in theory, this is trying to, well, here, sets the strength of the internal RD metric to bias towards high frequency error. Okay? So, how I described it in the other video was these are about trying to maintain the energy of the image, okay, or the specific block in the image. Which, yes, that's high frequency error. Okay, so if you've got energy at this level, when you are compressing, you're very likely going to lose some of that. This is saying, hey, put that back, but it might be doing that by having error in there, by having artifacting in there. That was something I experienced when working with FreeRen, because it is a largely computer animated, is my guess, anime. So it's clean everywhere, okay? And the only things that are on there have been intentionally placed there versus hand-drawn, where there might be some variation because, you know, hey, a hand just, you know, bumped a little bit while drawing. It's that is nothing against hand animation. Do not get me wrong. I'm just saying that modern anime, and modern cartoons as well, can be very clean because it's being done in computers. So that high-frequency error can look poor there. But for plenty of things, it even says helps with texture preservation and film grain retention. Yes, but I'm not completely convinced. This is something I tried to explain in the other video as well. I will repeat myself here. It seems it's not necessarily preserving the original information. It might be, because it is trying to keep that high frequency stuff in there, so the subtle details, it's trying to keep those there. But it might also just be introducing errors, introducing artifacting that looks consistent with what is there. So visually, it's fine. Visually, it looks correct, even though it's not one-to-one. And as is noted here, it goes between 0 and 8. The default is 1. The film grain tune sets it to 4, forces it to 4. And for a lot of things, I have been setting it to 4. So a lot of times I am basically just using the film grain tune with some other stuff. But still, it's very helpful to be able to change it. Because as I was saying, with the anime, I couldn't turn it up that high. If I did, it was introducing errors. It was looking worse. So, and I actually have it in another tab. I have SciRD at 1, the default, for FreeRAM, and that actually looks quite good. All right, now let's talk about this one. This SPI-RD, which is now TX bias. Oh, I should also clarify. AC bias is the new name for SciRD, and that's what it is in the mainline encoder. That actually got brought in. I'm not sure if TX bias has been, but in any case, that is the actual name of the parameter now. But I refer to it as SPI-RD still because that's how it was introduced to me. Okay, so this is, it's quite different. It's a switch. It has 4 positions, but it's a switch whereas AC bias goes from 0 to 8, and it can be like, 1.5, 1.2. You've got 2 significant figures there. All right, so TX bias is a transform size / type bias mode. I will acknowledge, I have no idea what that means. In theory, though, it should be, the options are disabled, full, transform size only, and interpolation filter only. In theory, it's got to do with how it is it's transformation of, so it's like how it's taking the original thing and then processing it into something else. Okay. It can be very powerful. It can be very useful. I wish I understood its underlying mechanisms better. I really do. One thing that I have noticed with it, and is a reason why I tend not to use it much anymore and tune with other things, sometimes though it is exactly what I need, sometimes, not always, is it was first introduced in Psychovisual Fork. When it was even pointed out it can introduce additional artifacting. It's like the Psychovisual can as well. And so I've already mentioned that. That's why I had it turned down for FreeRAM. But SPI-RD can do it. It can also do that. More so what I will notice from it is it seems to have a noticeable, but not heavy, sharpening effect. Which in some cases, yeah, I want that. Because sometimes the general compression is flattening a lot of stuff out. It's losing some sharpness. So turn that on and, hey, it's giving it back and it's helping in other places as well. Because it may then help with, like some of the film grain and such, might help with, okay, let's keep that preserved instead of letting it get thrown away. So, yeah, but at this point, I typically keep that off unless it's I'm struggling to tune this in. Let me try turning that on because the impact I typically see from that should help. All right, now let's get to this one, noise normalization. This is another one that's back from when I was working with the Psychovisual Fork. And it is noise norm strength, the noise normalization strength. Selectively boost AC coefficients to improve fine detail retention in certain circumstances. And it has values 0 to 4, but it would be just those 5 positions, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 is the default. As you can see, I keep it at 2. Because, as the description here says, boost high-frequency detail to preserve detail. That's a poorly written comment there, but in any case. What I typically do, or at least have been doing, but I also have been skipping it, is I'll start with this is the configuration I use to just run something through and see how it is. I typically end up going to noise normalization of 3 for basically everything, and adjust the Psychovisual as needed. For FreeRAM though, I bumped that up to 4, and it worked very nicely. So noise normalization seems unlike Psychovisual. This is actually trying to preserve the original detail. Okay, so it is more focused on finding things like the edges and trying to preserve them. Psychovisual stuff is not necessarily concerned with trying to preserve that. In my experience, it will introduce, it's instead allowing errors to get in there. Noise normalization isn't about that. So for Freewin, this clean anime, as I've described, noise normalization was great. I turned that up to 4, psychovisual at 1. It looks good. I have started looking more closely in preparation for some of this stuff, and so initially my plan was I wouldn't be showing, I wouldn't be talking about one of the tools I use for comparing the video before and after, but I looked and saw, oh, there's an update with, oh, wait, there have been lots of updates with lots of new features. I need to show this. So I'm going to do that video at some point. Geez, where would I put it? No, I guess it makes sense for it to still follow these, so yeah. One issue with basically doing this stuff all ad hoc. So anyway. But yeah, noise normalization, it is very powerful. Like, as far as I've definitely seen it help me a lot with getting the visual quality I want at the end. So, but the funny thing is I tend not to see many people talk about it. Alright, so those are the main ones that I mess with outside of the film grain synthesis stuff, which is all right here. But for the most part, it's these two things. But let me first acknowledge this. So AV1 does have a built-in digital noise reduction algorithm. Generally is recognized as being crap, so don't use it. But I still have it here just in case. Just like I have the FMPEG filter, DNR filters up here. The difference being that in theory, the digital noise reduction here, which by the way, by default, in the mainline encoder, I think it has it applied default in HD in the HDR fork and the psychovisual fork before it, turned it off. Okay, so the only noise reduction occurring is just what happens naturally from lossy video compression. Okay, but maybe you want to turn back on, and one reason that it can be better to use the built-in one, even though it's crap, compared to external ones, is the film grain synthesis process, because it compares against the input video. It compares the input against the output to try to then figure out, okay, where do I need to put the film grain? It respects... AV1's DNR is done after the input, whereas if I turn on the FFmpeg DNR filters, that's before the input. So the input to the encoder then is already denoised. That's why you don't necessarily... If you're going to start doing digital noise reduction, the internal one might, in some very specific technical situations, might be better. But by and large, try not to use it anyway. I just have it here, so I have the control if I ever want to use it. Alright, so now I'm going to pause because I need to get a drink of water, but then we'll get to grain, which is for the actual full grain synthesis, like what I just described, where it is comparing the images, and then photon noise, which functions differently. Okay, so as noted here, the strength value for the film grain synthesis tool is 0 to 50. I have it at 25, which... Okay. Maybe it's because of other things I'm doing. Excuse me. Because, like down here, see how I have that COF set to 34? Actually, I'm normally at 40. Okay, this is just 34. It's definitely good, but it is a fatter file. Okay, it's a higher bitrate than I necessarily want. I tend to be at 40, and then I'm just adjusting all these things to tuned in. Okay, so doing things that is bumping up the bitrate in places, trying to preserve the image quality in places where it's just a... That's where it needs it, and other places not. It can be at COF 40, that's fine. So I do wonder if that's part of the reason why. Because when I've seen some people talk about what film grain setting they use, they're like, oh yeah, I'm at 10. I can't imagine going higher than... I'm like, at 15, that's for very grainy stuff. I'm just like, what? I've got stuff that's even just mildly grain. It's, well, not, like medium grain, not high grain. It's like 25 is where it needs to be to actually do a good job. But maybe it is... I'm getting rid of so much grain through COF. Maybe that's why? I don't know. But yeah, I tend to keep it at 25. Plus, it's also... Ideally, you want the film grain synthesis to match what was originally there. So it's where it has been lost, then you kind of just, having go like that. It meshes together. That's kind of what you want, ideally. Tuning it in that well can be very tricky, though. In which case, then, I actually want it to be more intense. I want that film grain to be there. So if it's lower, then that means that there's going to be spots where it's missing. So I do prefer that it's higher. But I will I'll mess with that value. It's just 25 tends to be where I typically leave it at when I'm using this. Just trying to think if there's anything else to mention. I'm also just quickly looking. I actually don't remember where it is in here. Excuse me, where it is in the documentation for the parameters here. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yes, I do also need to mention this concerning, because this is the film grain parameter. Film-grain, and 0 to 50, as I said. This actually has two effects. One is how much film grain it can apply, which, by the way, I can believe that the actual algorithm it's figuring out, it's analyzing, okay, here's where we need film grain. How intense can it be? And then that's what this does. It still knows this is where the film grain is needed, but how intense it is, that's what the setting controls. But it's also doing something else, which by default, with the HDR fork, doesn't mean anything. This is also controlling the level of denoising, okay, to try to remove the original film grain. That's disabled, though, because we've got film grain denoise as an option, which is basically what that DNR is turning back on. By default, this is no, don't apply any denoising. So the film grain is just applied on top of what you have there. Yeah, but it's still the film grain. So with this, if I were to have that enabled, this would be both saying how much you should try to remove the original film grain and how much it should be trying to put in, or at least the intensity. Yeah, it is kind of unfortunate that it's just intensity, which, because the film grain synthesis stuff, it's basically just an overlay being applied on top of the image. It's kind of annoying because it seems like all you're really controlling here is just, okay, how opaque is that overlay? Is it very opaque? Is it very light? It's a little annoying that's that instead of other things, but it makes sense why it is this way. But let's move on, because actually with photon noise is where we do have something finally solved. Okay. So photon noise. So the idea here is, generate noise table for film grain. 50 is roughly equivalent to film grain 50. Default is 0 for off. But it can go between 1 to 200. Okay, so you can have it be very obvious that you're applying this. Now, technically, I still use the photon noise name. It got changed. The parameter name got changed to just noise. Same thing, though. This is more generic. So there are actually tools, I'm not going to get into them, for pulling out the film grain synthesis table, the FGS table. So you can, it's a text file, you can look at and do stuff. When it's this, right? You look at that, it can be a fairly large table because it's an array. Well, a fairly large file because it's an array. It's a table that's every so often it's changing because, like, oh, in this scene it should be done this way. In that scene it should be this, and so on. This is one table, so it's just applied across the entirety of the TV show, the movie, whatever it is. Across the whole of the video, it's the same film grain table. Okay. That's not so good because that means it's not adapting to the situation. But it also means it cannot be fooled. Okay? It means that if in the original encode, it ended up pushing the film grain, it ended up dropping a lot of it, but it didn't realize that was film grain. So the synthesis, the analysis for the synthesis, the analysis for FGS, failed to pick that up. This has no idea about that. It's just going to apply the film grain there. So I've actually come to use it a fair bit more because instead I like having the film grain be visible, so I don't mind if it's tuned up a bit above what the original film grain was. This actually makes that a little easier to achieve. This makes that easier to manage. And also has pretty good granularity here as well, going from 0 to 200. 100 is actually fairly intense. I must acknowledge, that is actually fairly intense. So it's a pretty grainy source I'm looking at. Fairly often, though, I am going to lower levels. It really does depend, though. If it's a relatively clean film, I can go down to 50. That might be a yeah. I don't see any film grain. So 60 or 70, 75. That seems also very reasonable for a It is a fairly clean movie. When it is more like, yeah, there's a medium level of grain there, then, 75, 80, 90, maybe even 100. I don't think I've encountered anything when I'm going above 100, though, okay? Which, assuming that's linear, 100 about corresponds to the grain setting of 25. Oh, wait. No, sorry, 100. Yeah, no. Oh, no, 50 is roughly equivalent. 50, I don't know, then. So this is actually more intense. Whatever. It's not linear anyway. I said, assuming it is linear, but no. So this would actually be a lot more intense than grain 25, but I've actually seen it where it looks pretty similar. Anyway, let's stop embarrassing myself and talk about the thing that's really, really awesome with the photon noise stuff. Okay, and this is relatively new. This is about 2 months old at this point, and I'm so glad it's here, okay? Photon size. Or noise size at this point. Set size of noise grain. Higher values result in a larger looking noise. Default is -1, so it's auto. It's based on the resolution of the image, of the video, and then 0 to 13 for setting it. This is very powerful, okay? You said to 13, it's obnoxiously large, which that might sound bad. You don't need to use 13. I just have it at 13 here because if I really need to turn it up, yeah, it's... But no, I don't think I have anything that would actually need 13. But that means that you're going from basically the fine, very fine grain to obnoxiously large, as in you're seeing the pattern in the noise table, in the FGS table, which you don't really want. You don't want to see it there. You want this to be subtle. So you have all that range you can work with. Yes. And it is. I've had films where absolutely you need to go in and you need to tweak this because you want it to mesh. And some of the stuff, hey, that film grain is not just intense. It's not just very visible. It's also large because some film grain changes. Even within one film, the film grain that they use can change. So this, so useful, so powerful. A lot of the time, though, I think the highest I've ever gone is 6 in something that I've actually done. A lot of the time, if I'm using it, it's more like 2 or 3. It is subtle differences between the lower values, 2, 3, 4, and such. But it is... Having this is so nice. If I didn't have this, and even though a lot of times I'm leaving it at auto, the fact that I'm able to control this makes me a lot more comfortable with using the photon noise film grain instead of the traditional film grain. Unfortunately, this cannot be used in combination with grain. Okay? Like, if I could do this, I would. I would love that. That's not an option, though. Yeah, so somehow, I don't know how, because I don't really understand how the arrays work for telling the decoder what kind of film grain to put in. But it is definitely a different array, and it's in multiple values. It's not like, oh yeah, change this value and it'll impact that. No, it's more involved than that. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there for how. But yeah, so that's so nice. I'm so glad I have it there. I'm so glad we have that as a setting. All right, now let's talk about this one. So this is chroma noise. So right now, what is typically being done is the film grain, the FGS stuff, is only impacting the luminance. Okay, so it's just this spot will be brighter, this spot will be darker. Okay, you can also have it apply into the chroma, so into the color channel for the video. So instead of it being this color red, it'll be that color red, or that color red, or that color red. Okay, and if I remember correctly, I'm not sure. Okay, so by default, it does not do that. You can force it on. Apply noise to chroma planes based on the luma plane, luminance, When enabled, chroma noise will appear on grayscale content. You don't want that, obviously. Okay, it's kind of weird. You're watching something that's black and white. Why is there color now? But in theory, this would... I can understand why you'd want the effect, but that would be like you're actually making the video yourself, I would think, instead of it being off of a movie, off of a Blu-ray. Sorry. But noise chroma, with strength based on the noise setting when it's at -1, it's basically you can control the chroma noise separately from the luminance noise. I have no reason to believe I will ever use this. But maybe I will want to. I might also need to turn that... I might also need to add something to use that... Well, no, it shouldn't... Yeah. No. So I can just leave that as it is. The default is -1, which is 6% of the luma. 0 is off. 1 to 200 is the strength value, just like the regular noise. So right now, by default, it is actually doing stuff there. So I can turn that off if I want to. That's what this would be. Or I can crank it up and put in even more noise than... there would be normally. Okay, so sorry, it's a little weird because I don't really use it that much. In fact, I don't think I've ever used it. It's just there, so I can use it. And is that whole... You have something else that would force it on for grayscale, but it's also you have just, okay, it's auto, it's off, and then you control it manually. It's just, so there's multiple different pieces here. And as I said, I don't use it that much, but it's still, in case I want to use it, I can. And... I'm trying to remember. There is something. I cannot remember what it was. There was actually something where I was seeing in the original film some level of chroma noise. It was before I had this option here. It may also just... I think it was I just solved the problem by other means and just by tweaking in other things. Like, okay, now it's being preserved right. But yes, this does come into play. Okay, so those are the main settings. Even then, those are actually the main settings. Photon, noise norm, and SciRD. Now for these, which are from bottom to top, getting more likely for me to mess with them, for me to experiment with them. The reason why, by the way, why it is bottom to top like this is because that way I'm basically... Come on. Have this in view and then this stuff all in view at the same time. That's why. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip this one for the time being. I will explain why, because I want to talk about these two first. So both of these have to do with variance controls. So, and hang on, I just want to make sure... Okay. I just want to make sure I have the documentation somewhere that is most convenient for me. So I've mentioned in a previous video that AV1 really likes to look at a block and be like, okay, there's not much contrast in this block, so we're just going to crush that down. We're going to remove the detail and say that, well, it's all just one color. Okay? In some cases, that's fine, but in other cases, that's horrible. And is why when you're cutting out scenes, make sure that you have like the sky, a wall, a ceiling, something that was just a reasonably solid color that has just like some film grain there, so that it is noisy. Because you want to be able to make sure that you've got everyone tuned in to not disrupt that too much, or that the film grain stuff is putting it back in. Okay. Now, these two things. The first, VBS, that's controlling the variance boost strength. Set variance curve strength for variance boost feature, yeah. So it's mild, mild is 1, gentle is 2, that's the default. 3 is medium, and 4 is aggressive. So yeah, default is 2. I will, if I need to turn it on, go to 3. So this does a good job of preserving the detail. So it's like, that everyone wants to push out. Nope, turn that up. Hit 3 and it's better. It can also double the bitrate or more, which is why I try not to use it too much. But it is still very powerful, and sometimes that's exactly what you need. You turn that on, maybe turn down CRF to get bitrate under control, but that's how you make sure you're still getting the detail in there. Yes, by changing the CRF, you might be lowering the overall quality, but still, it can be better to have overall lower quality, but you don't have flat blocks next to detailed blocks versus having flat blocks next to detailed blocks and other places. Oh yeah, it looks pristine, but it's then looks like a patchwork quilt in other places. Okay, and yeah. Now VO, this is related. This is the variance octile. So this is those blocks. It's actually multiple blocks. I think it's 8 in total that AV1 will look at when it's encoding and say, okay, how many of these can be low contrast, at which point I'll just crush the whole thing down to be the one color. We can control that. By default, default is 5. So it's like, okay, if 5 of the blocks are low contrast, it wants to do that crushing. A lot of the time, that's fine. But sometimes, no, it's not. So now 4, 3. I think I've had to go all the way to 2 on it. It is the lower the value, the higher the quality will be. And yeah, you can... VBS, basically, you can always expect that's going to throw the bitrate through the roof. Okay, it is very powerful like that. VO, not so much. You can actually start tweaking that, and yes, it will raise the bitrate, but it may end up having a stronger visual impact than bitrate impact. So that is why I do have it underneath VBS here, because yeah, it is. Well, that is also just the way I initially put it, but it is just it doesn't have to impact bitrate as hard, but can still improve the image. Now QP Loom. What is this? It is a kind of weird one, and I want to see if I can find quickly the thing that the documentation on it in here. Come on. Might actually be easier if I that's getting me closer. Okay. Yes, this is it. At least I'm pretty sure it is. Adjuster frames QP based on its average luma value. Okay. So, my experience with this, and oh, it is nice. QP value, quantization parameter, is how much data can be thrown out. Okay. What this is doing is it's AV1 might be like, oh yeah, there's not much changing in the luminance in this area. There's low contrast, so this does actually relate to the variance boost stuff. It might be like, oh yeah, there's not much there. I can really raise the QP value, so more data can be thrown out. This allows you to control how much it actually changes there, or where the cutoff is for when it'll start throwing out more data. And this can be very powerful, because I've worked with some black and white films where, in order to get to preserve the detail, because some of that is older, so it's very grainy. Some of that is VBS is what I need for that, but I don't want to double the bitrate or triple the bitrate, something like that. So I started experimenting with this, because like, hey, it's black and white, so all we've got is luminance data here. It's like, yeah, I just don't want it to start throwing out as much data as this. So let me try turning that up, and whoa, it made such a difference. I can have that it goes from 0 to 100. I think the highest I've gone is 15. And that was more than needed. Like, a lot of times I'm at 5 or 10, or even lower. Like, I've had some where it's 2 or 3. But it makes such a difference. It is so strong, and basically is giving me that same effect as VBS, but it's not hitting the bitrate as much. And it's very granular. It's 0 to 100. And it said the highest I've done is 15. So I can go to 10. I can go to 9, 8, 7. I can go to all those. So I can really tune that in if I feel it's necessary. So I'm getting the detail I want, but I'm not getting the high bitrate of VBS. It's awesome. Now, I mentioned I use this in black and white films. I've also used it with color films. It can actually be very powerful there, because it's another way to, like the whole with the sky where it's trying to crush that down. It's another way to avoid that. Typically, though, when I've run into that, I've just set it to a very low value, like 2. So it's just kick it up a little bit. I don't need much. Kick it up a little bit. And it is very effective. It's very effective there. So Yeah, and that's definitely why I have it in this spot, because I want to go to this before I would go to here. VO is situational, so I might go to VO before going to QP Loom, but definitely QP Loom before VBS, because it is you can dial in the impact without things going nuts. Okay. This one is weird and relatively new for me, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to find it in here. Might be over here though. Okay, yeah. So, and now that I have the name there. So this is, it's wild. It can also have I'm going to double the bitrate for you kind of impact. So this is for controlling the variance boost curve, which is not very much described here. The default is 0. 1 is an alternative curve, 2 is a still image, and then 3 is an HDR PQ transfer. Translation: the person who has made the HDR fork came up with his own curve, this PQ curve that is more so for preserving, it's perceptual quality, a custom curve specifically designed for HDR video and images with a perceptual quantizer transfer. It can manually be turned on by setting this to 3, or automatically by setting the corresponding CP value, transfer characteristics to 16. I'm not doing that. I'm just turning this on manually. And yeah, it can be very powerful. When I've been experimenting with it, so some of the films, like, with the sky, a lot of it comes back to that, where there is the film grain in there. It might end up getting washed out, and there's nothing I can really do about it. But at least it's even. So then the photon noise is putting some back in, but it's like it's even, so it's smooth. I'm not getting the patchwork. But I've also seen where sometimes there can be a flicker. So it's like, just light dark, a little bit of something like that, and that can be elsewhere on the screen. I'll turn this on. I'll set it to this custom curve, and it suddenly is preserving this. It's like, whoa, this is looking a lot better. The output video is not as smooth as it is otherwise, and that's because whenever you're doing lossy compression, yeah, you can lose some of the that grain, some of the I don't want to say detail. It is just film characteristics. You can lose some of that. Plenty of times, though, it's not that big a deal. Plenty of times, you want it, but you don't want to double the bitrate. But it's still, in some cases, yeah, I've been experimenting turning this on. It can be very effective. One thing that I was trying to tune in recently, I tried tuning this on. I also tried something else, which was just turning up the CRF. Turning it down. So having the CRF set to preserve more detail. And what I found was, in some cases, they were actually pretty much matching. And so I had, with this set to 3, so with the PQ curve, I had that 4 CRF higher. So more data being thrown out. Lower quality by a step of 4, okay? And by the way, I've been forgetting to mention CRF in here. It's not just integers. You can actually go to even the hundredths spot, I believe is. I know the tenths, but I think the hundredths even. Yeah, so 4 there. Between CRF, it was a CRF of 38, CRF of 42, but the 42 included the VBC 3. They were actually very similar in bitrate and in quality. But I opted for the CRF, the higher CRF, because in some of the spots, because it wasn't quite 6 1/2 dozen the other, I do think that the higher quality CRF was overall looking better on the film, in the image. But the VBC, it was still having a very positive impact. So it's like, maybe. Because it can be like, in the sky, maybe the VBC, that's doing a better job at avoiding it looking like a patchwork. Or maybe the CRF was. So it's like, you got to look at those things and be like, okay, yeah, this is what I want, or this is what I want. So it is powerful there, but instead, it can double your bitrate. Maybe that's acceptable. Maybe you're working at levels where, hey, that's fine, let's do that. But it might also be in other places, no. That's too much. I want to go to these other options. Kind of like VBS versus QP Loom. Okay, same kind of idea. It's all about tuning it in to get what it is that you want. Because something's very powerful, more powerful than you want. It's giving, it's touching things you don't want touched. So you try to go to the more subtle thing, where it's like, okay, now it's harder. It takes more time to get that in right, but that might be giving you what you really want. It's all about the balance. All about the balance. All right, and now we got these two things that, I'll be honest, they're here because I saw them being talked about and do sound fairly powerful, but I don't really mess with them because I don't have a good understanding, and I'm not sure what they would actually provide that would be helpful. So CDEF scale, which it even mentions here, for controlling the feature's strength. Lower values improve sharpness, but risk haloing. Let me see if I can actually... Okay, so it literally feature addition. So this is something that the HDR fork has added. Controls how strongly the CDEF constrained directional enhancement filter is applied to the output. Lower values make output sharper at the expense of ringing artifacts. So that'd be the haloing. Higher values make output smoother with fewer ringing artifacts, but smoother does mean that you're potentially losing detail. Values of 10 to 12 have been reported to be useful by multiple people. The default doesn't actually say what the default is. Let me pull up the main documentation. Default is 15. Okay. It goes from 1 to 30. So, constrained directional enhancement filter. I'm thinking that has to do then, so it figures out the motion vector, how the thing moves, and it's like, okay, constrained, how do we, once it's getting moved like that, so it's motion based, what can we do to improve the quality of it there, or its appearance there, which would explain why you might have ringing artifacts, where something has moved, but it might be, doing some stuff where it's a little shaky, so it's trying to sharpen stuff there from that movement. And ringing can be an effect of sharpening, over-sharpening. Because a lot of the sharpening algorithms, the kernels for them can actually, it's not just sharpening, it's not just working on this pixel, it's actually working on the ones around it. So yeah, lower values might be, hey, it's a lot sharper, but it's affecting stuff around it. Higher values will change the kernel, so it's going to be more internal, so only working that pixel, but that can also reduce the quality of the pixel, because it might not be then getting information from the pixels around it, but less ringing. So yeah, it's potentially, this can be powerful. I don't know enough to really mess with it, so I'm not going to. It's just there, so I can. And then QP scale increases consistency below average qualities, has options of 0 to 3, with 3 being the strongest. 3 can be better for high CUF values. I'm pretty sure that's in the main README here. Let's see if I can find it. No, that's not it. I think it relates, though. Oh, okay, well, there's that, so I can explain that, please. Okay, so I'll come back to that, but let me... I do kind of remember what it is, but I still want to... Okay, yes. QP scale compressed strength is meant to improve spatial temporal quality and, by design, overall quality consistency. So, okay. When it's talking about compressed here, it's not talking about like data compression. It's talking about signal compression. So it's easiest to explain in audio. A high dynamic range for audio means that you can have things be very quiet and you can have things be very loud, and it captures all of that, okay? High dynamic range. A compression compressor for audio will be like, nope, we're going down in this range. So it brings the peaks lower, but also the lows higher, okay? And this is something that you can see that in some modern music, it's horrendously overcompressed, where it's basically everything is at the same level all the time. So you don't have really any dynamics there, aside from just the frequency itself, but there's no, for volume, actual actual differences, or very little compared to older methods of music processing. So this is doing the same thing with the QP values, okay? So the QP values, that's the raw, how much data can we throw out, raw quality control. So having a larger dynamic range there does mean then that you can have, the very high peaks and very low lows. So it can go from, hey, I can throw out a whole bunch of data, to I need to keep everything I can, okay? Can have that swing there. You start compressing that down. Now it's say, okay, I can't throw out as much data, but it might actually be like the low levels, so this is highest quality, might just be going like that. But still it's doing stuff like that. So that can make it smoother in that from one frame or one scene to the next, it's not allowed to suddenly jump and throw out more data. So that's where increases consistency. Oh no, it does lower average quality. So it might still be going like that instead of like that. Or it could even be, especially if it's combined with a maximum bit rate, it doesn't have the ability to be like, okay, here I'm going to lower the bit rate because I don't need it, which means that now I've got those bits available over here. So it might also be that. Of course, you trade off mean quality to standard deviation consistency. The stronger the algorithm strength, the more consistent quality is from keyframe to reference bidirectional reference frames, and other frame types. So it's just from one frame to the next, things can change. How much they are allowed to change, that's what this is controlling. In exchange, however, the fewer the opportunities frames can be used as references because they're relatively low quality than the child frames. Okay. Thus, it brings down the average performance in most cases, except for one case described further below. This parameter allows advanced users to switch between 4 levels of quantize or compression, compressing quantized values across all hierarchical temporal layers inside of a mini GOP. I only understood half of that, I will acknowledge. But it still is. It's basically... there's one part in there I will explain, but it is that whole, how much is the Q value allowed to vary? Ideally allowing it to vary a lot, but what it is doing, where it's supposed to be, the other tunings, should keep that under control. That would be my answer to this. That, no, it's fine. It can vary all at once. I got this IRD. I got the noise normalization. I got QP. I got all this other stuff that is keeping those values in check. But go ahead and vary, because I don't need it throwing bits at a scene that doesn't need more bits. But there still might be times when, hey, you want to control that. The other thing I was mentioning here is... Where is it? The stronger the algorithm strength, the more consistent quality is from keyframe to reference frames, and other frame types. In exchange, however, the fewer the opportunities frames can be used as references because they're relatively lower quality than child frames. So what that's talking about here is the possibility that I in a different video explained iframes versus p-frames. So the iframe is the reference frame. That is perfect, encoded as well as possible. The other frames reference this one. What this is referring to here is that possibility of what if the iframe is low quality? Now all the child frames, the p-frames, based on that one, are going to suffer for it. This, it sounds like, can produce a situation where it's like, okay, no, I'm not going to use that iframe, I'm going to use a different one, so it'll improve the quality, possibly. Has 4 different values, 0, 1, 2, and 3. 0 disables the feature, that is the default. I'm good with that, as I said. I want it to vary the Q value. I want the other stuff just influencing that so it's the right Q values. At 1, it is conservatively reducing the QP range, useful for increasing visual consistency at all quality levels with next to no cost. At 2, it reduces it further. Usually, this is useful at higher quality levels where restricting the QP range across layers is more important. So this could also be hey, you're going to start pushing the bitrate up. It's more consistent there, but it's also you want to make sure you're tuned up higher anyway. And then 3 is the upper limit that is found useful for general purpose but not target quality encoding. So this might be more so like you're using a fixed bitrate as opposed to target quality. That's CRF, that's QP potentially. This is useful at maximum fidelity expectations or when the CRF/QP is very low. In the latter scenario, this feature can actually improve fidelity. So what that's saying is when you're already trying to preserve as much detail as possible, you turn this up, you're guaranteeing more that it is going to preserve the data, preserve the image quality. Because it's like, hey, no, I'm setting you to QP of 10, which would be very low. Okay? So that's very high quality. I'm setting you to 10. You don't move from that. Whereas normally it might be okay, I'll move from 10 to 15. It's like, no, 10. Or maybe that might be a 2. I don't know. I'm just giving values. Although that's actually, I've got something encoding right now, and I'm seeing it's actually FMPEG is showing the Q value. I don't know if it is the correct Q value, but right now it's saying Q of 38. Just saw 36, 37. I think I saw 34, 32. Yeah, there's 32 there. Saw 38, 31. I think I've seen 39. So yeah, that's that range. In theory, this would be crushing that down, but it might also be lowering it. It might, be bringing it down to here instead of going like that or like that. Yeah, so I want it varying. I'm good with it varying. As I said, I want it can vary as much as I want. I just want it to be at the right values whenever it varies. That's what everything else is for. But still, this could prove useful. So I have it there. Okay. That actually is all of them. I don't do... Oh, wait, no. I forgot. Almost forgot about the maximum bitrate control, which I definitely do need to talk about. But this is something, as I always said, don't use it much. It is generally better, in my opinion, and my experience. Yours can vary. Is generally better to just tune in all the stuff and let it be freely variable. So if it decides, hey, I need to go up to 9 megabit, but the rest of the time I'm at 1.5, that's fine. Allow that. Because when you try to keep that bitrate down, it doesn't like it. It looks horrible. I hate it. Okay, because the artifacting, it's like, I can stand lower detail, okay, just a smoother image overall. I can stand that better than higher detail, but look at that horrible blocking. Look at all this artifacting. I hate that. So anyway, the way I've got this set up, CRF, preset, then give the rate, okay? So I can set it to like 3 megabit. That typical maximum bitrate that I was setting in 265. But, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in another video, but that doesn't actually set the maximum bitrate. Despite the setting being named maximum bitrate, it actually doesn't. Let me see if I can actually find that here. I should be able to. Fairly easily. Yeah, max bitrate. Maximum bitrate only applicable to CRF encoding. Also accepts PK, B, K, and M suffixes. So it's adding the K on later. I'm not putting it in here, but for I tend to work in kilobit here instead of in megabit. So it can also do that, although it cause confusion later. Okay. Yeah, this is a lie, though. This is a lie. It is not the maximum bitrate. And this is even in the documentation to a degree. Let me see if I can scroll down to find it, so I can read to you what it actually says. Okay. MBR overshoot percentage. It's allowed to go over this, by default by 50%. So that 3000 maximum bitrate, now it can go up to 4.5 megabit. Go up to 4500 kilobit. So what's the point of calling it maximum bit? To be fair, I'm pretty sure that's like, okay, instead of it being like a square, where it's like, okay, it can go up to 3 megabit, it's like it has complete freedom here. It's okay, for 50% higher, you're getting less and less freedom, where it's like, okay, you can go to 3.1, that's okay. Try not to, but that's okay. You want to go to 3.2? I really wish you wouldn't. 3.3, 4, it's like, I'm definitely wishing you would. 4.5, it's going to be like, you must have a damn good reason if you want to go to 4.5. Okay, that's what's kind of going on there with the overshoot, okay? And I get that. I understand that. It's still a pain in the ass when you're trying to tune this stuff in, okay? Because it's like, no, I want a maximum bitrate of 3. And it'll allow stuff to go up to 4.5. But I got that figured out here. It's just not really written in here. So that would tell, yeah, an overshoot of 50. overshoot of 100. So you can go all the way up to 6 megabit in this case. Or 0. No overshoot allowed at all. That is also a thing. So that would be like the X265 behavior. And coming here, you can see, I do have it right here, rate over. Set it to 50. If this is not blank, then set rate over to whatever it is. So otherwise, it just takes the default. Okay. Nothing too complex there, nothing too weird there. But it is this is, unfortunately, why do you call it maximum bitrate if you got overshoot? Alright, I guess I'll also explain this. It looks like a horrific mess, I promise. It is not that bad. So this is how it builds up the full commands. So, for example, we can use spyrd. If the spyrd parameter set up above is not blank, then this SVT parameter string that I'm building up with, this is all passed to the encoder. Add on this next parameter, you add them on using colons, tx bias equals whatever the value is, and then I also have that written into another string that's meant to be human readable. When I'm doing testing, it is actually written into the file name, so I can easily read it. And also that way, every configuration will be a different file. But it also gets written in as a comment, so that way I can review it after the fact. It's just going to be in the metadata of the file, along with the preset. So this, it's a little silly, I know. So the preset is given first, then the CRF, and these are not labeled. Okay, other things have labels. Like you can see here, this is for the overshoot, is dash OVS, and that will be the last one added. VBC is there. I actually have that after HQ and TQ. HQ and TQ had been the last before, but VBC I expect, I'm going to touch that so infrequently, let that be later. But yeah, all that stuff gets built up and written in here. Before that though, I already covered this. We got preset CRF, the maximum bitrate config, so that is just what the MBR is. Overshoot ends up being at the end. The noise normalization, again, that I've been using that one for so long. Yeah, it doesn't need a label. I know what that is. And psychovisuals after that, and then the full configuration stuff. So again, like this, there's the VBS. And one thing that's nice about doing it this way is if not blank, then add this. So if it is blank, it's not even in, because it's just going to be the default then. And yeah, a lot of these, but it's all basically the same idea. These are a little different. So DNR, if it is set to 1 to enable, then it's film grain denoise equals 1. Otherwise, though, it's off. It will never. So if I put in 0, it just won't do anything. If I put in 2, which has no meaning, it doesn't do anything. And then HQ and TQ, they must be Y that I passed it in order for it to apply these things. Oh, yes, that's right. I did see. Okay. Enable DLF2. Okay. Enables a more accurate loop filter that prevents blocking. For modest increase in compute time, most noticeable at presets 7 to 9. I'm working on presets 4 and 2. But, yes, that's right. It's a loop filter to try to prevent blocking. I've still encountered blocking, but that's when the bit rate is not, it's not getting enough bit rate, enough bits. That's fine. But still say that's what that's doing. Okay. Where's the cursor? I kind of lost sight of it. There it is. Okay. So for the things that basically just always going to be there, like CHVS, that's actually, yeah, so that's just, I assume it's always going to be on or always going to be off. So that's not part of a normal configuration. Noise normalization and SIRD, those also always going to be there. So those don't have this fancy thing in here. In theory, I could change that, but I don't want to. It's fine the way they are. So I set this up so that this is the only command that actually calls FFmpeg. So builds up all the stuff, sets CRF, sets the preset, because typically that's all I need, and the source as well, but opens these up. And this is actually important to do. I know in a previous video I mentioned you don't have to create a variable in a batch file to start assigning stuff to it. It is best to do that here, because if I were to say drag and drop multiple video files onto this script, it will actually remember SVT param from the previous one. But I don't want to do that. I want it to clean start each time. So do need to do that here. That's very situational though. Must acknowledge that. Because it's here, it's building it up. But something else like the CRF, no, that wouldn't be a problem, because that's being set specifically to one value. It's never building something up. It's always set to that one value, so that's fine. And similar idea with SVT config. MBR config is set to VBR by default, because by default I'm doing variable bitrate. But if the rate that is set, so that's the MBR rate, if that is not blank, then it will engage MBR, the MBR parameter, and put whatever that rate is into that MBR config, which is then used in the comment here and also in the file name in the test script. A lot of this is the same, but yeah, so you can see the comment is there, but the out name is whatever the input name is, -SVT to identify what the encoder is. Presets, CRF, MBR config. Yeah, so largely it's the same as that, but not completely. All right. Yes, an hour and 16 minutes to go through all this. Some of that definitely because of my blathering, and also because the whole, yeah, I'm reading this, I'm remembering how to do it. I get that. But it's also, there's a lot of parameters here to go through. And that I'm going to turn this off. That is actually one of the reasons why, at this point, I am using AV1 more than 265. Part of it is also definitely, since April, this is I'm not sure which commit necessarily, but it is off of the 4.1.0 of the mainline SVT-AV1 encoder. So it's off of that, and there's been tweaks made since. But anyway. Since this late April one that added in the photon noise size control, I just highlighted it. You can't even see that. Anyway, hang on. Can I do this? Does this make sense? Not really. Hang on. There. That makes sense. Doing this... It is now at the point that I feel it's okay, more often than not, it will get me the image quality and bitrate that I want, file size that I want, better than X265. It has reached that point. But it's also, there are enough knobs, dials, switches that I can hit with this, with AV1, that even if on its... I can get it to where I want it more easily, because there's just so many things I can hit, and I've got the experience now, that 265 with its much fewer, maybe in theory, 265 I could get to match AV1, but I'd need to go in and learn a lot more about a lot of its parameters that I don't understand. I haven't seen, or just I'll read the documentation. It's like, I don't see how that's going to help me. So, yeah, it's... AV1, to get the most out of it, definitely has a learning curve. And I've climbed that curve, and I've made this script to try to help with that. 265 seems the learning curve is lower, at least for general use. For the most, to get the absolute most out of it, maybe it is just a very steep curve. That's what I was saying. It's like the parameters that I don't know what they mean, so I'm not really using them. I'm not seeing other people talk about, hey, you should do this. Because that's how I've done some of the stuff with AV1. It's just I've seen people talk about that. I look into it and say, okay, I understand how that can be helpful. I'll put it into the system. I might not ever use it, but I'll at least have it ready. That flexibility to tune stuff in is significant to me as it pertains to AV1. Because it means I can just figure it out. I can try to tune in this, tune in that. So it is like, with Freewind, I was mentioning. Noise normalization strength of 4 but a psychovisual of 1. That's not what I do for basically anything live action. But the fact I'm able to go in and make those changes, that makes it a bit easy, because now I can narrow down to exactly the image quality I want. Takes more time to go through it all, but it is this is something that it's worth spending time on if you want to get that grace efficiency, where it's like image quality you're happy with, but also small file size. So, and the funny thing is, I actually did see, fortunately I was also seeing other people call this out, but I did see somebody make a comment about SVT-AV1 not being that good for animations. Like, no, it's fine, but if it can be if you're only working with psychovisual stuff, then no, it's not so good. You want to mess with the noise normalization. And it is, as I also said when I was talking about that, it seems like not many people are aware of that setting, of that parameter, which, that's disappointing. I think I can stop now. Isn't that nice? Been an hour and 20 minutes, but there's a lot here. I still got more to go through. Because I got the multi-channel audio, I've got muxing, I've got subtitles, I've got video compare. I think that's it, though. Yay! I'm almost done. See you next time.